Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming on this very chilly night with a few snowflakes coming down and almost a full moon, or just after being a full moon, rather. It is such a thrill and an honor to have Vievee Francis and Matthew Olzmann here with us tonight. We're really excited to have them both read their poems for you and then be in conversation with Nathan McClain, who will be both introducing the poets and then moderating the Q&A with them afterwards. So that'll be the structure of the event. As I just said, Nathan will be introducing them, and then Matthew Olzmann will read first, followed by Vievee, and then after a brief, slightly awkward stage reshuffling, the three of them will be in conversation. And then after that, both Matthew and Vievee will be signing books right over there. If you didn't see it when you came in, both of their most recent collections are available. These two beautiful books, The Shared World and Constellation Route. Please stop by. Our friends at Broadside Books back there in the back atrium would love to help you out. And also just come by and say hello afterwards too. I'm sure the poets would love to meet you. As always, I want to thank our tech team, Dan, Tom, and Jeff, for bringing this event online and to the streaming audience. So thank you. A special welcome to all of those out there in Zoom land or Facebook or YouTube land. Thank you for joining us for this event for tonight. Just a quick reminder to please silence your cell phones. My English 112 class, just remember to sign your QR code. You know how to do it at this point. At the end of the event. And then we have just one reading remaining in our fall season, but one that we're really excited about. Mark Wunderlich will be here on December 12th, closing out our fall season. And we have a wonderful lineup for the spring. I'm not going to go through everything, but we will be kicking things off on February 13th. With the amazing Patricia Smith. So please join us back here for that reading. And more information about our spring season will be coming your way soon. I think there's also, if you're not on our mailing list and would like to be, there are QR codes also out in the atrium, and you can scan that and find out about things like Patricia Smith coming here on February 13th. And now it's my absolute pleasure to briefly introduce my friend and Five College colleague, Nathan McClain. Nathan is the author of 2 collections of poetry, previously owned from Four-Way Books in 2022, which was longlisted for the Massachusetts Book Award, and Scale, which was also came out with Four-Way Books. He is a recipient of fellowships from the Frost Place, the Sewanee Writers Conference, and Breadloaf Conference, and is a Cave Canem Fellow. His poems and prose have appeared in many journals, including the Hopkins Review, The Common, Guest House, and Poetry Northwest, among many others. He teaches at Hampshire College and serves as the poetry editor of the Massachusetts Review. Nathan is also the father of the amazing Zora, who's out there somewhere. Where's Zora? Hi, Zora. Please welcome to the podium, Nathan McClain.
Right. For anyone who knows me, they know that Zora is, in fact, my best work. This is and thank you so much, Matt, for having me. And it's beyond thrilling to be here introducing and being in conversation with these 2 poets. This is a particularly special reading for me, as I have personally known and loved these writers for a very long time. So it's an honor to introduce them, and as they have been poetry heroes of mine and continue to be. I don't expect all of you to be familiar with my work, but one of the opening poems in my debut collection, a poem entitled Fire Destroys Beloved Chicago Bakery, features a Louisville Slugger, which is a baseball bat for the uninitiated. My poem includes a Louisville slugger solely as an homage to Matthew Olzmann and his poem of the same name, the first poem I'd ever read of his, which was published in his 2007 chapbook, The Discarded Halo. See, you all didn't know Matt published a chapbook. I wasn't aware of Olzmann's deceptive wit then. I only remember feeling disoriented, splintered the way the speaker of the poem was splintered, slowly coming back to himself as the doctors gouge and stitch whichever wound keeps opening. I remember thinking, who in the hell is Matthew Olzmann? After that, I closely followed Olzmann's work for years. As his name appeared in online journals, I read poem after poem, though I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. Only that Olzmann's work resonated with me. The benefit or the gift of reading the broader catalog of a writer's work is what gets noticed from poem to poem, from book to book. While the voices of his speakers remained relatively consistent in their utterances, always confident, always convincing, with each subsequent Olzmann poem I read, I noticed some additional craft techniques that seem to infuse his poems and his speakers with even greater nuance and complexity, namely the manner by which his poems introduced, managed, and utilized irony, sarcasm, and wit as an element of counterpoise in his work. In his letter to someone living 50 years from now, which reads to my mind like an update to Szymborska's Notes from a Non-Existent Himalayan Expedition, a poem I know Olzmann also admires. For instance, his speaker opens, most likely you'd think we hated the elephant, the golden toad, the thylacine, and all variations of whale harpooned and hacked into extinction, which is funny. His speakers so wonderfully charming and disarming that the emotional complexity of our own complicities for the state of our world, that the same beings capable of experiencing joy, wonder, curiosity, and transcendence are also capable of contributing to and guilty of our current climate crisis and the erosion of all living beings with our actions or inaction. It quietly slides into place. There is a parable or allegory that states that if you toss a frog into boiling water, the frog will simply jump out of the water. However, the parable states, if you slide a frog into a pot of tepid water that is gradually heated to boiling, the frog supposedly will remain in the water until it boils to death, apparently unable to detect the gradual increase in temperature until it's too late. I have no idea whether the details of that tale are actually true, though the latter certainly describes the feeling of being inside a Matthew Olzmann poem, being slipped into a situation you didn't know was dangerous until it was far too late. Before you know it, you're history. Matthew Olzmann is the author of Constellation Route, as well as two previous collections, Mezzanine, which was awarded the Kundiman Prize, and Contradictions in the Design, all from Alice James Books. He is the recipient of fellowships from McDowell and the National Endowment of the Arts, as well as the Kundiman Prize. He received his BA at the University of Michigan, Dearborn, and his MFA at the Warren Wilson College's MFA program for writers, where he now teaches. He is also the senior lecturer of creative writing at Dartmouth College and poetry editor for Hyphen Magazine. If only for the sake of posterity, someone should build a website, maybe you're here tonight, dedicated to recording meaningful craft advice one has received over the years. I imagine it a collaborative, collective space, not unlike Wikipedia. And I might personally insist that this imagined website would have a section simply titled Things Vievee Francis Has Said to Me as a Matter of Public Record. Aside from her being a tremendously skilled poet, Francis has also served as a meaningful teacher and mentor to poets who have gone on to wield significant influence in the field, who themselves have garnered impressive accolades, recognition, and praise. I raise Francis's importance and influence as a teacher and mentor because I trust that you'll hear, enacted in Vievee's own rich poems tonight, the feedback and advice she has so generously provided others. Sometimes about their work, sometimes about their lives, which, if poet Ellen Bryant Voigt is to be believed, are, at least for the writer, inextricable from one another. Thinking about a teacher's love feels interestingly appropriate, especially as we consider The Shared World, her recent collection. Quote, "My mentor, Vievee Francis, always said a poem needs torque," poet Jamal May remarked. I take this to mean a poem always needs a thing moving against another thing around a fulcrum, because without torque, nothing moves. Nearly 2 years ago, poet Era D. Matthews tweeted, or X'd, I don't know. Quote, "My mentor, now kin, Vievee Francis, showed me how to craft metaphors and break bad writing habits in a cafe in Hammontrack, Michigan, twice a week while I suffered postpartum depression and nursed my infant, now 11, under a blanket." To poet Aziza Barnes, Vievee said, quote, "To pare down my language and say the true thing about my identity." To Gabrielle Bates, she said, quote, "Risk clarity. The poem won't be ruined if you let us in." Of Vievee Francis, my dear brother Tommy Blount, who calls Francis my first poetry teacher, said, quote, "She opened her home to me and a handful of other poets, teaching us everything she knew. This was serious study with reading lists and exercises and presentations, serious. Though through her tutelage, I not only learned I could write and talk about poetry, but that my voice also mattered." And to a struggling young poet named Nathan McClain, as I contemplated not applying for the Cave Canem retreat for fear my poems were not Black enough, Vievee said, quote, "What isn't Black about love or desire or family or fatherhood? What isn't Black about grief or regret or disappointment?" All of which realigned my perspective. Teaching us everything she knew. That's the kind of poet Vievee Francis is, for all of us. She isn't interested in hoarding knowledge or in gatekeeping. Her aim to enrich the field at large, to make us better, more thoughtful and daring as writers and readers. And we find enacted in Francis's poems that pared down language, that finely crafted metaphor, the risk, the clarity, the torque, which facilitates its own kind of movement and music. She shows us, in her own words, quote, how craft alongside context may underscore intent. Vievee Francis is the author of The Shared World, as well as Forest Primeval from Northwestern University Press, which won the 2017 Kingsley Tufts Award and the Hurston Wright Legacy Award. Horse in the Dark from Northwestern University Press, and Blue Tail Fly from Wayne State University Press. Her libretto for Ritual of Death is the Right to Resist, an opera by composer Jonathan Berger, has been performed at Dartmouth College and Stanford University in California. She received a BA from Fisk University and her MFA from the University of Michigan. Francis has taught widely, including community-based writing workshops in Detroit and on the faculties of North Carolina State University and Warren Wilson College. She currently teaches at Dartmouth College as an associate professor of English and creative writing. And I'll close with this. In an early conversation about The Shared World, Francis talks about lineage, influences. She conjures Gwendolyn Brooks, Szymborska, Miłosz Zagajewski, Galway Cannell, Naomi Shihab Nye, and says, quote, lineage doesn't begin and end with gender and race. Lineage is who we study, who we care for, and who cares about us, who speaks to us when we write. And here's the reminder that we're connected as poets. I'm grateful to be connected to both of these poets, that they are part of my lineage, that they are part of all of ours. So please help me welcome to the stage Matthew Olzmann.
my invisible horse in the speed of human decency. People always tell me, don't put the cart before the horse, which is curious because I don't have a horse. Is this some new advancement in public shaming, repeatedly drawing one's attention to that which one is currently not and never has been in possession of? If ever I happen to obtain a Clydesdale, then I'll align absolutely it to its proper position in relation to the cart, but I can't do that because all I have is the cart. One solitary cart, a little grief wagon that goes precisely nowhere, along with, apparently, one invisible horse which does not pull, does not haul, does not in any fashion budge, impel, or tow my disaster buggy up the hill or down the road. I'm not asking for much, a more tender world with less hatred strutting through the streets, perhaps a downtick in state-sanctioned violence against civilians, wind through the trees, water under the bridge, kindness. LOL, says the world. These things take time, says the Office of Disappointment. Change cannot be rushed, says the round table of my smartest friends. Then together, they all say, the cart. They say, the horse. They say, haven't we told you this already? And so my invisible horse remains standing where it previously stood, between hot dog stands and hallelujahs, between the NASDAQ and the moon's adumbral visage, between the status quo and the great filter. And I can see it's not my horse's fault, being invisible and not existing, how he's the product of both my imagination and the greater good's failure of imagination. Watch how I press my hand against his translucent flank, how I hold 2 sugar cubes to his hypothetical mouth, how I say I want to believe in him, speaking softly into his missing ear. Thank you for being here. I'm still thinking about that introduction and that thing about the frog, which is really fucked up. How that, like, who figured that out? All right, before we go any further, I want to publicly acknowledge that I love every person in this room. I mean it. We've traveled from all over to be here, and I love each of you, all of you, every last one of you except Harold. But the rest of you I love fervently and without limitation. It's important you believe this is a boundless love, rhapsodic, without timidity or hesitation, because everyone is deserving of compassion. Absolutely everyone, just not Harold. But for the rest of you, this affection is perfect, unconditional, and free. Not unconditional with air quotes around it. Not unconditional like a gatekeeper in the garden saying, look at the fruit, but do not shovel it into thy weird little face. Saying, love me and none other. Saying, the firstborn, the locust, the welt of grief I've pressed upon your back. This is a truly unstoppable wave of tenderness that doesn't traffic in punishment or retribution. In ethically challenged times, it's important to have a stringent moral code, steadfast as the oak whose taproot plunges into the earth, deep enough to allow that tree to never waver, never sway, never give in to the winds of convenience and malice, and therefore this faultless love never marches out into the frostbitten fields or down the cobbled streets of its numerous enemies to shout things like, oh, motherfuckers, I am petty and malevolent, and I will track you through the sleet to show you all the ways in which your world can fracture and die. This love would never think to say something like that. Instead, it reaches with a gentle hand, a heart full of benignities, and an unflinching recognition that, without question, there is no living soul unworthy of forgiveness except Harold and now Marcus and possibly Mackenzie, but really no one else beyond redemption. It is a love for which there are no omissions, no exclusions, no rules or fine print on this contract, which is binding. I'll read a few poems from this but Constellation Route. "14 letters to a 52 hertz whale. Dear 52 hertz whale, because you sing at a frequency no other whales can hear, scientists have nicknamed you the world's loneliest whale. I'm sure it's unbearable out there, swimming through eternity, calling out and calling out and calling out and never getting a reply, never hearing a kind word in response. Wherever you are, I hope you're being careful. 2, dear 52 hertz, would it be weird if I came to the ocean to visit? I haven't figured out the logistics of this, but it'd be cool to hang for a while. Problem is, I don't know how to find you. I could get to the beach, but then what? If I swam out to meet you, I'd get eaten by tiger sharks. If you swam to the shore, you'd get stuck and then you would die. Once there was a video going around the internet of a beached whale, and it was dead, and the villagers didn't know how to get rid of the carcass, so they tried to blow it up with a bunch of dynamite. That didn't work out too well for them. 3, dear whale, it was stupid of me to mention that other whale getting blown up with all the dynamite and everything. Totally insensitive. Sorry. I have no grace. I've been told this before, that I have no grace. I apologize. I'm just trying to make conversation. I'm no good at this. Sorry. 4, hey, do you ever dress up as other animals? If so, what kind? It's almost Halloween out here. I was just wondering. 5, dear whale, Halloween was totally stupid. This one little kid came to the door dressed as a dolphin, and he had a net over him, and I said, what's with the net? And he said, every year hundreds of thousands of dolphins and whales are killed by the tuna fishing industry because they don't know how to avoid these nets. And I thought he was insulting your intelligence, so I said, look, motherfucker, you don't know a goddamn thing about whales. Get off my porch. 6, maybe I overreacted there. 7, dear whale, you ever see people swimming nearby and think to yourself, I could really have some fun with this? 8, like maybe you could surface right next to them, then yell something like, Jonah, I've been looking for you, then open your mouth really wide. 9, that's what I would do. 10, I don't know, maybe whales have better things going on. 11, do whales believe in providence? 12, do you ever float on your back and scrutinize the stars and see unexpected figures among them, like maybe the shapes of other whales? Do you assign them names and imagine stories for those make-believe creatures as they drift through the dark? Do those stories lend structure to your days and nights? Do they comfort the nervous waters, constellate the disjointed heavens, render the marvelous in a manner you can endure? Do you believe them? 13, how cold is the bottom of the ocean? How crushing is the pressure down there? 14, do you ever worry that because your voice is impossible to hear, maybe no one will make the effort, that you can work really hard and try to make a difference in your community and try to be a good person, but then at the end of the day, the waves will just swallow you whole, they'll take you under, you'll disappear from the world, and you won't even leave a ripple on the surface? Letter written while waiting in line at Comic-Con. Klingon, Parseltongue, Na'vi. People invent imaginary languages so imaginary citizens of imaginary worlds can speak to one another. Elvish, Ewokese, Dothraki. You can learn these languages, come to a convention with your face painted blue or a leather scabbard bolted to your back and talk to people who will understand you. I understand what language feels like when you're not understood. More than once, I thought some other planet might be my home. Like last week, in an alley, I saw one man punch another man until neither looked like a person. There are hundreds of reasons like this to yearn to be from some other century, galaxy, or dimension. Reasons to put on a spacesuit or wizard's cloak and hope no one will recognize you. But it's not these costumes that amaze me. It's always been the languages, the way they reach for something that can't be said in our tongue. In the only language I know, there are not enough words for parabola or isotope, too few phrases to say I'm sorry or I'm glad that I found you. Though we've been married for years, I wish we met when we were children. If we had known each other in the year you spent alone on Earth without one friend, We could have been aliens together. I'd have those green four-fingered hands, you with your glow-in-the-dark antennae, words in the form of strange whirling noises, low chirping machine music, wisps of static, lamentations of rain. Only you and I would know what these sounds meant. That poem's about Vievee. Vievee always tells me, Vievee's always saying, all your best poems are about me, you should write more of those. And then I'll read them in a place like this and she'll say, everyone's looking at me, you should stop writing about me. This is a letter to Bruce Wayne. A good place to hide a drop of water is a stream. A good place to hide a stream is beneath an ocean. A good place to hide a man is among thousands of other men. Watch how they rush through the city like water through a ravine. I've searched many famous cities for you. There are 3 listings for a Bruce Wayne in Houston, 2 in Pittsburgh, 1 in Miami, 1 in LA. In Tampa, Bruce Wayne is a retired chemistry teacher. In Flagstaff, he drives a taxi and hopes to procure a diamond for his soon-to-be fiancée. A good place to hide a star is a galaxy. A good place to hide a galaxy is a universe. Look at the night sky. Justice used to be a cowl and cape, the flicker of wings under an ateliated moon, and you, like a gargoyle, crouched atop some stone edifice. To conceal a universe, place it in a multiverse, that hypothetical clatch of alternate realities. The dilemma of the word alternate is how it implies a norm, a progenitor stream from which the alternate diverges. Which is the alternate? Which is right here, right now. There is no such thing as Gotham City. But here is Gotham City, and I've been so naive, believing the truth of the old mythologies, how they promised a recognizable villain, a clown with a ruby-slashed mouth, a lunatic's laugh. In the universe where I exist, supervillains look like anyone else. Give them an old flannel to wear, a square jawline to smile at the world, and suddenly they're hanging a noose in my middle school bathroom. Shouting, "Get out of my country," from the window of a passing car. They're pulling a pistol in a crowded barroom or bus stop or the middle of the street. They could be anyone. They could be everywhere. A good place to hide a sociopath is a full-length mirror. A good place to hide that mirror is the heart of America. In the battle of good versus evil, I was so certain good would win. Now, I just hope something good will survive. Get a job cutting hair or selling cars. Make it home in time for dinner. I suspect there's a parallel dimension where you, dear vigilante, long for this as well. To have a normal life is victory enough. To remain anonymous and not be spat upon on the subway. In Boston, Bruce Wayne owns a pawn shop. In Milwaukee, he plays pinochle and feeds stray cats. In New Hampshire, he goes fly fishing on the Sugar River, reels in one brook trout after another. When he removes the hook from a mouth, he might place the fish into a cooler, or he might set it back into a stream. The alternate or the original, no longer certain in which he stands. First foray into apophatic theology. And then God is not like the sound the kindling makes as it meets the match head, not like the buoy in the bay invisible at night, not like gravity calling to the pair on the bow above the field, nor the beam from which the boy you knew roped a knot around his neck to yoke this life to the next, if there is a next, and if not, then to nothingness. God is not like nothingness. If God transcends all, God transcends language. If God transcends language, we cannot deploy language to articulate what God is. If we cannot articulate what God is, we can only announce what God is not. This is how I approach the divine. I study the corona that circles the eclipse, which I've been told not to look at. Still, there's some elegance in the bright blur of pain behind my eyes, and so, unable to see the center, I trace the edges. I outline the mystery's border. like making chalk silhouettes of the body at a murder investigation, a technique no detective actually uses as it would contaminate the evidence. God is not the evidence, not the residue, the shell casings, the blood pattern, or the partial fingerprint, not the container or the object emptied. I'm not saying God is the negation. I'm saying the crime scene has been compromised. I'm the one who compromised it. All right, I'm going to read two more poems. On my ranked list of best Catholic saints, this one's usually in the top 5. Saint Catherine of Alexandria, patron saint of teachers, lawyers, and archivists. Also, patron saint of spinners and potters. Additionally, patron saint of mechanics, scribes, girls, and unmarried girls, which seems a little redundant. One would think unmarried girls should be eligible for coverage under the previously mentioned classification of girls, but this is Catholicism, where one can never be sure of anything, except maybe patriarchy, which has no patron saint, but if it did, St. Catherine would likely be called upon, as her case list is weirdly extensive and also includes Greece, apologists, millers, and all of the Philippines, which then includes exactly 1/2 of my family tree, my mother's cheekbones, my Lola's recipes, most of the collected prayers I know but can't remember why. I feel I've lived a life worth remembering if I'm able to pay the electric bill or empty the dishwasher. This would be laughable to St. Catherine, who by mid-morning has already intervened before God on behalf of tanners, students, nurses, scholars, philosophers, and preachers. Furthermore, both knife sharpeners and knife grinders fall under her jurisdiction, as do dying people, which feels like a conflict of interest, as in her time there was a correlation between knives and dying people. This was not her only paradox. She converted hundreds to her faith. Then these new believers would be promptly executed by the empire. Did she know that would be the fruit of her labor? Was this the will of the saint or the will of the emperor? Is there a difference? I too have knelt before a God that knelt before an ordinary Caesar. I too have felt the outcome was unjust, though providence holds little interest in how I feel. It's as arbitrary as human memory, and memory was not then and is not now the responsibility of St. Catherine. Her responsibilities are the well-documented, previously mentioned categories of patronage, as well as secretaries, the University of Paris, haberdashers, theologians, librarians, and libraries, which I assume includes all the pristine collections presently in existence, but also those history has forgotten or set ablaze. Historians are not included on her oddly inclusive list. A shadowy group of untrustworthy thinkers. Modern historians currently argue St. Catherine did not exist, or perhaps was a different figure with a different name, or maybe even an amalgamation of several people who can't be identified, thus must also be excluded or expunged from history's most grand records. Though it's possible these anonymous beings, banished from history, standing beyond the margins of collective recollection, might have been recognized and loved by their neighbors as stenographers, wheelwrights, spinsters, or hat makers. And I'll leave you with this commencement speech that's intended to be delivered to a herd of walrus calves. Young walruses, we all must adapt. For example, some of your ancestors gouged their way through the world with 4 tusks, but now you can grow only 2. It's hard to say what evolution plans for your kind, but if given a choice, you should put in a request for thumbs. Anyway, congratulations. You are all entering a world that's increasingly hostile and cruel and full of people who will never take you seriously, though that will be a mistake on their end. You are more tenacious than they know. You'll be a fierce and loyal defender of those you love. You will fight polar bears when they attack your friends, and sometimes you'll win. Of course, odds always favor the polar bear, but that's not the point. The point is courage. The point is bravery. The point is you are all fighters, even when the fight in which you find yourself ensures unpleasant things will happen. For example, this bear is going to gnaw apart your skull or neck until you stop that persistent twitching. It will eat your skin, all of it, then blubber, then muscle, then the tears of your loved ones, in that order. It will savor every bite, and you will just suffer until emptiness can wash over you. The good news is things change. For example, the environment. Climate change indeed is bad for you, but it's worse for polar bears whose conservation status is now listed as vulnerable, which is a step removed from endangered, which is a step removed from extinct, which is a synonym for hooray, none of you get eaten. I suppose this will make some people sad. Even now, they're out there posting pictures of disconsolate polar bear cubs on melting ice floes drifting toward their well-deserved oblivion. They say, we need to stop this. They say, we need to do something now. These people are not your friends. One cannot be on both Team Walrus and Team Polar Bear at the same time. I'm not saying these people are evil. I'm saying it's time to choose a side. I'm saying sharpen your tusks, young calves. Your enemies are devious. You need to train yourself to do what they won't expect. For example, use computers, invest in renewable energies, read Zbigniew Herbert. Unrelatedly, your whiskers make you appear to have mustaches, which, seeing as you're not even toddlers yet, is remarkably unsettling. Babies that look like grown men freak me out a little. Like those medieval paintings by so-called masters where they'd make the face of little baby Jesus look like an ancient constipated banker. If that's what God really looks like, it's no wonder we've done what we've done to the earth. Maybe you can repair what we spent lifetimes taking apart, replace some screws, oil some hinges. This might sound impossible, but have you ever looked at yourself? Seriously, take one look at a walrus face and tell me how that's possible. Everything about it defies the laws of physics. You will learn to exist beyond the reach of nature. You'll learn to slow your own heartbeat, to preserve oxygen while diving to depths of over 900 feet. You will stay awake for up to 3 consecutive days while swimming on the open sea. And when the ocean is too rough, so terrible with longing, so ruptured with heartache, you'll find a small island of stone or ice offering refuge. It'll be difficult to climb from the water, but because there's hope for us all, you will hoist yourself up, using only your front teeth and the muscles in your face to drag your body onto the stone. Thank you all.
Break me, and I'll sing. My voice like marrow, a blood yolk spilled upon the counter. You can't stop this song. More hands than yours have closed around my throat. You may crack me. You have cracked me. I'm frightened, but so what? I'll testify. Witness. If you can, listen. I slurped the frog leg soup gone bad, held a brass spoon like a barrel to my mouth. I could tell you what you want to hear, but I'd be broken just the same. So why not sing? I'm singing now, louder this time, and in the round. We are a wounding of red-plumed birds, every voice a bloody feather in the bone crown. Now, I'm going to make a request because clapping inflates my already considerable ego. So, I see someone's clapping about that. So, if you wouldn't mind not clapping till the very end, that would be great. Thank you. The shared world. Into the bow of your ear, I whispered the secret story. Now you can't sleep either. Consider it part of your own memory, connecting our childhoods that would have otherwise never crossed. I fell down and your knee was scraped. I stuffed the yellow cake into my mouth and your stomach cramped. When you were abandoned, grief filled my well. The private ravages of our spent youth and adulthood, now implicitly intimate. You pull me to you because I have already softened your sharp elbows. The pressure of your fingers in my shoulder leaves an impression as if in need I had touched myself. We are insomniacs, the grip of night freeing us from the slept-through day and its demands. It is true, once you know, you can't unknow. So we ruminate on literature and the gods and continually seek the ousia of the emptied jug. But we need no wine, really. We are eager to get on with it, to take in and do whatever forwards this living, this tripwire, keeping us tied, kite to string, present to past, arrow to quiver. Given to rust. Every time I open my mouth, my teeth reveal more than I mean to. I can't stop tonguing them, my teeth. Almost giddy to know they're still there. My mother lost hers by now. I am embarrassed nonetheless that even they aren't pretty. Still, I did once like my voice, the way it moved through the gap in my teeth like bird song in the morning, like a slow swirl of a creek at dusk. Just yesterday, a woman closed her eyes as I read aloud and said she wanted to sleep in the sound of it, my voice. I can still sing some. Early cancer didn't stop the compulsion to sing, but there's gravel now, an undercurrent that reveals me, time and disaster, a landslide down the mountain. When you stopped speaking to me, what you really wanted was me to stop speaking to you, to stifle the sound of my voice. I know. Didn't want the quicksilver of it in your ear. What does it mean to silence another? It means I ruminate on the hit of rain against the tin roof of childhood, how I could listen all day until the water rusted its way in, and there I was, putting a pan over here and a pot over there to catch it. Oh. Dropping my papers. I've worn it 3 days in a row. The dress my mother died in. No, the dress I was wearing when my mother died. And I took pictures of myself. Of the dress, of my legs curled tight under the dress, only my ankles and feet showing. I held my arm up and back and did not want to show my head, my swollen eyes and chapped lips, and all that dried salt on my face. My face, she could not bear to look at, unless it was with disgust. My hair, never good, no good, and my unironed dress, this one I am wearing now, with its white cotton underslip and its red embroidered paisley upon a white background. It is beautiful, even with me in it. Yes, I am not wearing a hat. She said, "You look so ugly in that hat." It was my favorite one of 3 hats. She had more than 100 hats stored in her basement in labeled hat boxes. They were her particular thing. Every Sunday, a new one, perched proudly as a bird of paradise, though only the males are so presentable. But she was a tomboy once, and so was her mother, so she hated my teacups and my dollies that I couldn't sleep without, like I slept that day when I found out she had died. I lay fetal upon the bed atop the duvet and wanted to live and felt guilt like a razor over the wrist. You always were odd and always carrying on. You talk too much. You are a mess, and I was a mess. My chest wet and my heart shrinking in, and I was shrinking, and this was good. She was always such a small woman, except for 10 years, when she grew past what her small frame could hold. Who can say why her hunger grew, and why she hated my hunger to be held, and so recoiled, and I went days and days without any touch at all, and I have gone days and days since, ugly in my hat. Even my father thought so, though now he isn't sure. Since she died, so much has changed. Even this dress, now stained by wear and coffee and crying, and now the pills won't let me, and now and again sleeping in it. And just last night, keeping it on for dinner, alone at the same counter where I was when I found out she had died, a few minutes after our last phone call, when she couldn't see me and so could afford to love me. "1965 for Matthew." So my new book is entitled The Shared World, and on the cover of this book is the poet Galway Connell and his student, Harriet Richardson. I always say Richards, but I think it's Richardson. And I don't know if you can see that gaze. It's just beautiful. 1965 for Matthew. In Selma that day, the photograph, the way she is looking at him, not his name, his pallor, not the city nor the event, not even the blood on his neck, him. When I saw the picture, I realized someone cared enough to take it. There was only one lens. Then the entire world wasn't always watching. She pressed that cloth to his neck as intimately as a kiss whispered into the channel of an ear, spontaneously, sudden and overwhelming as a father's embrace after a father's failure to embrace. I was 2 years old. It was before I knew what I was born into. It would have been illegal for me to have married my husband. My husband stares at the picture and, enraged, considers the context and stakes, but a man so compassionate cannot easily take in its lack. It takes the violating or the violated to know. The reward of courage is this: my husband told his parents he would marry me, period. He expected his parents to live up to the values they espoused. They have. If I cry, my blue-eyed father-in-law, whose own father left Germany during the nascent rise of Hitler, cries. Galway's eye to Harriet's, brown as mine. Look at the way he looks at her, like a sun rising twice to be Galway that day, looking into the face of the tender after terror. See the grace of gratitude, he being there, she being her. Just a brief shift. Nouveau slip. When I first moved to New England, what a culture shock. I was coming out of North Carolina, and I had been in Detroit, and I had no idea how important yoga is. And speaking of gazes, the gaze was always upon me. Some are convinced if I simply practice yoga, if I just consider it, I could be white, American white. The small of my spine would uncurve, straighten, as would my teeth. And the gap of my teeth, the gap would close as a gap between my thighs magically opens without me having to spread my legs except upon a thin mat next to another doing the same. In pants like another skin, and that is the point of American yoga, the great equalizer, as if my breast will stop swinging apart as those of the women of my line tend to do, our nipples under by 30 whether we nurse or not, as if my belly will flatten into some sign of discipline and my self-denial taken as a sign of class, here on this free Vermont border where I have lost my appetite, even as I long for brisket and ribs and collards and kale stewed the way the poor stewed them before the wealthy decided they wanted that too. And what's not to love here? The air, the light, the houses older than ships. I can't keep anything down but me, where I am free to be anything but in this body, which is in this skin. But I don't miss brown people. I miss round people. The body uncorseted by male design. The body with its curated appetites, content in stillness and in its security, having at last stopped its reaching. I've been thinking about love again. Those who have it, those who live to have it, and those who live to give it. Of course, there are those for whom both are true, but never in the same measure. Those who have it to give are like cardinals in the snow, so easy and beautifully lit. Some are rabbits, hard to see, except to those who would prey upon them, all that softness and quaking and blood. Those who want it cannot be satisfied, eagle-eyed, and with such talons any furred thing will do. So easy to rip out a heart when it's throbbing so hard. I wander out into the winter. I know what I am. The poets who are our enemies. The poets who are our enemies are not writing poems for beauty's sake. Their poems come in bottles from the sea to be put to our ears like shells. Their poems buried in the sands of prison yards, backyards, sequestered under stones, stone that was once the walls of a city, of a station, of a house, of a room in the heart of a house. Poems are torn from hidden notebooks of poets in hiding. Poems are disguised as tales on long-string kites, are given to carrier pigeons disguised as more common birds. Some poems fall or are thrown down, wads like grout between cracked tile. The poets who are ours to battle may lose everything, to pipes, to wire and glass, to objects simple enough to be found in a cabinet. These poets may die by fast talkers, by mistake, by gun, by bomb, and some by God by choice. The poets write to us of children and of strangers. They write with fingers in their ears to hear themselves think. Their poems are the only thing clear where little else is clear. The poems speak of a meal, of lemons, of baskets in an alley, of leather, and of the sea, always the sun-swallowing sea. The poets who are our enemies are not writing for the canon, but their letters are black as smoke filling an emptied square. They are writing for their lives. Some are dead already by the time their poems finally reach us. Their letters bold as the cry of a dog heard over shells, poems that speak plainly of a hand that seeks a hand, but finding nothing. A call to arms came as the lanterns floated upward on a night of celebration, and as flares spun upward out of the fear of those who set them. As shawled women smiled in the night, prayed into the night, and just as many ran through the swallowing night. As a bed was shared between two committed to shepherding each other, and as others committed themselves to harm. As doctors took their hypocritical oaths, as dentists clenched their own teeth, as a young woman was killed by an angry man, a stranger, because he was and remains angry at his mother, his life, and the opportunities he let go and blamed others for the loss. I am telling you, the call to arms came as we slept and as we marched, and as we questioned and as we hid our heads in the dust of our nostalgia, or our spent dreams of a future, and as bills were repealed, and as the debt grew and values diminished, as women decided other women mattered less, and the doors began to close and close and close and close and close, and those who had opened them were marked for what we refused to imagine or acknowledge, though this is not the first time. And I heard the call to arms like a moan from a drain desperately clogged, like the lowing of cows in drought, like the impotent drone of governors and the great blather of senates questioning the hours without answer, and no one satisfied by the moment, this moment. I hear the call and realize I am not the lion but the deer, that I must resort to my feet and my wits amid a storm of claws on a day that began as any other day, and I can't tell you why I hear what you refuse to hear or won't admit, like the pounding of your heart upon hearing this. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you both. First of all, those were incredible readings, and so thank you both for just for offering those up. And these are just such beautiful, beautiful books, which hopefully all of you will find out as you have already gotten them or will get them in the coming moments. But the first impression, I want to actually start by talking about, like, Vievee, you sort of mentioned the cover of your book, and
But I didn't give the full context
you didn't.
of it.
So I definitely want us to hear the full context, because whenever I think about, and as someone who thinks a lot about, like, book art and cover art, one of the first impression or expectation a potential reader has with the book is the encounter with the cover. And so I wondered if we might begin our conversation by talking about these beautiful book covers, these beautiful book art that you all chose. And I've read some of your remarks about the book cover, Vievee, but others may not be aware, so I'd love for you to talk about that. But could you both just take a moment to just talk about these selections, what factored into your selecting these specific images for the work?
A lot of my work is ekphrastic, so, and I really respond to photographs. So this particular photograph, the larger context I neglected to give was it takes place in 1965 in Selma on that bridge, and Galway Canal's been hit over the head by an officer, and he's bleeding. So it looks like flowers blooming, but that's actually blood. So he was there because he believed in civil rights, and he was also there helping his students. He had been teaching down there. And, but when the photograph, people saw the photograph on the book, so many people in his life at that time did not know that he was on that bridge, which was fascinating to me. So he actually has a different relationship in his history with African Americans. And definitely, I know several African Americans that would fall into his lineage. So also by using the picture, I'm upturning the ridiculous idea that lineage in poetry has to do only with race and gender. That's so arcane a thought. It's as ridiculous as being born in a state that tells me that would have told me I couldn't marry my husband. I don't tolerate these ideas. I push back.
All right. Yeah, this cover that covers the best part of the book, I think, and it's definitely a book that I would hope people will judge it by the cover, because it's by an artist named Adam Martinakis, who and I felt really fortunate to come across his work, because if left to my own devices, I've always thought like covers for my books would just be like dogs playing poker or whatever, and I don't. But it was during the pandemic, when in the early days when museums started doing like sort of online virtual tours, and I was doing those during the day and came across a different piece of his that I wasn't thinking about book covers, but then I looked at his web page and found that image, and it kind of stuck with me for this book. I thought it sort of spoke figuratively to some of the concerns, like an image sort of coming into view, things that aren't quite connected, starting to form an image, but also like a glance toward the heavens and things orbiting and connections. So
Yeah.
You know, I saw something else though in that picture. It looks like a boy, and he could be looking up in wonder, or he could be screaming.
Yeah.
And you can't. And it depends on the day.
Yeah.
that too, I also thought of that.
And speaking of which, I'd love to follow that up, that question with a question just about, to each of you, about your processes of putting together a collection of poems. Because if I remember correctly, you both work quite differently in terms of like how you put books together. If I'm not, so Vievee, I know this is your fourth collection, and Matthew's third. Matt, I've heard you mention in interviews that you write poems more so than you write books, however, with Constellation Route, with its almost singular kind of epistolary mode, which is a sort of a slight departure from your previous two collections, I wondered if it was a slightly different process for, putting this together, if it was like easier because of the fact that, you had this kind of singular mode that you were working in. And Vievee, I wondered if your process with The Shared World was different from other collections that you've organized and arranged. And I think, if I remember correctly, that you tend to work on several projects at once, right?
Yeah, so to answer the question of was it easier, no. And I thought it was going to be, because my first two books were mostly, they're poems, they're collections of poems. They have disparate approaches on various subjects. And then this one has a lot of letters in it, so I thought, there's at least a predetermined reason for some of these poems to exist together, whereas the other books I had to kind of figure out why they fit together or how they fit together, or did they. And so I thought it was going to be easier, but it turned out to be harder because I then had this new problem of how do I create variation when so many poems are using a similar approach. And then once I figured that out, it ended up being just like all the other books because the poems are all about such different things that I had the original problem anyway. So, so it was just like, it was harder to put this together, but one of the things I did, I sent a bunch of them to Jessica Jacobs, and she helped figure out the order for these. So I recommend doing that.
So get ready,
I'll
get ready,
send our
Jessica.
poems to Jessica.
Get ready.
She's going to be here, right, in March. So yeah, you'll all have that opportunity.
Yeah. And for any of my students who have enrolled in my next workshop, Jessica will be visiting that workshop as well. So. Yeah, was your process any different from the process of any other books that you've put together?
It was slower because my work's in transition right now. So the book includes several meditations, which is not the mode I usually work in. And I'm known for a kind of hard turn. And I was releasing that. And also, this book it contains poems that are more polemical, or at least I'm thinking about polemics in this work. So it took about a year longer than I thought it would, because I kept trying to figure out where I was going and should I take those meditations out and put them in the next book. But I'll let the readers decide. I think it flows well, but the readers will tell me.
Yeah, wonderful. And did you have more to say to that?
I would say it was harder to put your book together because you also just have a trillion poems. Like if I was Vievee, I would just take any 50 poems and be like, that's a better book than most books out there.
Yeah.
And
That's nice.
but no, she really does. She just has just files and files of poems that are that are great, and no one's seen them.
I'm prolific.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be asking you for some, that's for sure. Now, I would love it if we could talk a little bit about both of your relationships to the second person in your work, and maybe more specifically the nature of direct address. Obviously, like Matt, your collection is largely epistolary poems, so those, have kind of direct address sort of built within them. But I think Vievee, your use of the second person is often so incredibly direct and pointed and visceral, even when your poems are seemingly dramatic monologues. You still feel the presence of an other that's on the other side of that utterance. So I'm curious if you all would talk about how you think about the nature of direct address as you construct your poems.
I will write a poem directly towards someone, that you can be an individual that has triggered something within me. But as the poem progresses, then the you opens up, becomes larger. So initially, second person begins as a triggering point. It's very narrow. But by the time I finish a poem, which could be 30 drafts later or a year later, I've forgotten the initial insult because a lot of my poems are accusatory.
Yeah, you feel that finger pointing.
Yeah, and sometimes the finger is pointing back at myself because I write acknowledging my own complicity as well. But I love working with the you. We'll see if that changes. My work is always in flux, so we'll see if it changes.
Yeah.
For me, this book didn't really start out with me saying I'm going to write a book full of epistolary poems. I've just always sort of used that mode of direct address. My earliest attempts at creative writing kind of felt like things I just wanted to say to people that didn't know how to say them or didn't have the right words in the moment or the ability. And so my earliest poems kind of resembled like these unmailed letters. And that was something that stuck with me throughout years and years of writing. And at some point I kind of noticed that it felt like a thing that I might be relying on maybe too much. And I think when you become aware of your habits, like my first instinct is say, okay, I'm going to do something else. But for me, it was a question, well, what if I leaned into this thing that I kind of am drawn to and just did that over and over? How would that voice develop, or what would happen? I think sometimes poets feel like we have to reinvent the wheel every time we sit down to write something. But if something works for you or seems like it's intriguing, you might also try just like diving directly into it. And then at some point I realized like, oh, maybe some of these poems are going to fit together in a book, but that wasn't really how it started out. It was really just trying to see what would happen if I pushed into this approach or this particular voice.
But you had us write back to you in the book as well. I don't know what kind of
Oh, yeah.
address that is.
There's
Right.
there's that was when I was saying I was trying to find ways to create variation. I started writing persona poems, letters to like a fictional version of Matthew Olzmann from like,
Yeah,
the
I
Roman
noticed
Empire.
there's a number. Or from a
or
traffic light.
Yeah, or from a traffic light. And then I just asked like a handful of friends to contribute some letters. And so there's 5 poems in there by other poets. And so I was wrong. The book isn't the cover isn't the best part of the book. Those poems by some pals are my favorite part of the book.
Yeah, what did it mean? I was going to ask you about like the fact that there are, lots of real people who are like in this book, aside from, there's Jamal Mays in here, and you've got Larry, obviously Larry Levis, you've got William Shatner, but like Jessica Jacobs is in here, like in some of these
Right.
letters that you're writing to yourself. Like what, did that, I mean, was it just your relationship with these people that, made it seem like an interesting conceit to bring them into the orbit of this work as well?
Yeah, I've kind of been interested in different ways of thinking about non-solitary ways of making in what's usually a very solitary sort of art form. But it's not unnatural for like a musician to have like other musicians show up on like doing guest vocals or something on a track on an album or something like that. And but poetry, I think there's more of a tendency towards thinking of this book has to be all me and my voice. But
Right. No, that's fair. I think that's really fair. Switching gears just a little bit, you both are teachers, and you both have mentored adult learners as well. And I wondered how has, and I'm just assuming that it has, your teaching affected your own creative practice and work, and following that up, how has working in other genres, because I know with writing a libretto, and I know you've done some fiction writing as well as other writing. How has what has other genre work brought to your own work as you've come back to poems or continued working in poems?
Well, I feel like Matthew regarding the libretto, because a libretto requires a team. You're working with the composer, or you're working with the artist who might be working as well. So it's so visual, it's so rounded. I had never worked that intensely with other people before, and I feared the process, but then I loved it, right? And it's opened me up in trying to think about ways I might have that experience in my own poetry. And also, Matthew, you're doing your last book the way that you did. That's another kind of inspiration stream. So I don't have an answer for myself. I know that I want to continue to write librettos, but I began studying opera when I was very young, before I lost my voice, my singing voice. So for me, it comes full circle. As far as my teaching, I'm not going to give an answer people like.
Oh,
Because as far as my teaching goes, I feel I give myself to my students and give them opportunities to grow so that they may give themselves to others. The American idea of exchange, I'm giving my students something and they're giving me something in equal exchange. I don't think of teaching that way.
Yeah.
I think of it as giving myself over to the students so they can use that material in the ways that best suit them. I'm not looking for them to give me anything back outside of a listening ear and promising me that they'll practice and promising me that they'll share what they learn. So my writing practice and teaching practice are quite separate. However, like many Detroiters, I like to write with other people. I don't want to talk. I just like human presence, which is why I write so much in coffee houses. And I love it when the students and I are writing together. I feel there's peerage in that. They're writing, I'm writing, we're drinking tea or coffee. We look up, glance at each other, and keep writing, because I feel in the academy, the creative writer, the creative writer models what this field is for the students. So to sit and write together, that is where the exchange happens for me.
I love that answer.
What was the first part of the question again?
It had to do with
Waxed
teaching.
on.
Yeah, it has to do with how teaching has affected your practice
So teaching in other genres.
in other genres.
So, yeah, I think writing in other genres makes you more, makes me maybe more aware of specific expectations that I think any genre has its own set of expectations, and when you sort of write in different genres, you become more aware of some of those. This is like not necessarily fiction or nonfiction to poetry related, but for example, like within poetry, I was writing these wedding poems for a while because I was asked to write poems for a few weddings, and I thought I was going to hate doing it, and I thought it was,
Frightening wedding
and
poems.
but I actually really enjoyed it because like the sort of like the genre of the epithalamium has its own sort of conventions, and a lot of times writers are trying to figure out what their audience is thinking or what they're anticipating, and within this tradition, you actually really know a ton about what your audience is thinking or expecting or anticipating. You might even know people, like who's going to be there or where this poem will be experienced, which you never know when you're writing a poem. So I found that like having all that kind of was really sort of fun. Mostly, it didn't make me better at the poems. I wrote a lot of poems that'll just like if anyone needs poems that'll like alienate all the guests at their wedding, I've got you covered. But that's one way. I think like genre sort of moving between them sort of like heightens your awareness of what you expect within this genre. So and then. How does teaching inform writing?
Yeah.
I just like being in a place where I can think about poems all the time, and I'm very sort of one-dimensional as a human. You know, I write poems, I read poems. I'm married to a poet. My fantasy basketball league is all poets. It's like there's not a lot of variation there. So I like being in. It's like that's what I can do. And so being in an environment where you get to just talk about poems or read poems. I have a job where if I'm like sitting at my desk reading a book of poetry, that's totally appropriate. Or if I'm writing a poem, that's like my dad's an engineer. If he was going to be like at his desk writing a poem, they would be like, Kurt, we have to talk to you about your use of company time, and he'd probably be looking for a new job.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's retired now, but
Now he's writing poems.
Right? No. Thankfully, no. But I'm sure he would have I'm sure he would have a lot to say, in an interesting manner. But I don't. So I don't like. And I think when I mean, teaching at different levels, like if you're obsessed with a question, you're trying to figure something out, gives you the opportunity to sort of dive in and study it and see how something works. Once at Warren Wilson, I had a student who was interested in had a question like, I always hear that poems need a surprise us, but how does surprise work and what does it do? And I thought that was a fascinating question. And I spent probably 8 months thinking about that and developing a lecture around it, but just kind of, and so I mean that's a way that teaching sort of informs the writing. But I mean Ellen always said the work informs the life and the life informs the work, and that's just one example. So
Yeah. Wonderful, and we'll close with this question here, which I mean we've got lots of different folks out in the crowd here, lots of them students, and so I wonder for them to be able to hear, what keeps you coming back to poetry, not only as a genre for your own artistic expression, but what keeps you coming back for it in happiness, in joy, in for solace, in contentment, what keeps you coming back to other poets?
I wouldn't say I go to it for contentment or joy. It doesn't provide that for me. I would say it provides solace in, I experience the world as a kind of roiling, R-O-I, as a kind of roiling and dangerous place. I also experience it as a wondrous place. I can feel wonder. Joy is more difficult for me. But when I'm reading poetry, I can lose myself. But when I'm reading poetry, I can also accept myself. I can see what's happening to me through others. And when I'm writing poetry, I write the poetry of redress and address. I typically speak to specific issues, and they may feel relatable or no, but I write compulsively and have been. I'm 59, I'll be 60 in a month. And I've been writing almost daily since I was 19 years old. So I began writing, and by 24 it was a compulsion. And it is the only way I have in my entire life to be heard, and sometimes, when I'm very lucky, seen. So I think the compulsion is driven by a kind of human need for to exist, to not be invisible in a world that would erase me if it could.
So what keeps me coming back to poetry? Well, it's probably a lot of the same things that really drew me in it initially. I mean, I became interested in poetry as a reader of poems because I started finding poems that sort of helped me understand the world in some way. This was probably even before I knew the word metaphor, but I remember reading a poem and thinking, and realizing that it felt like it took complicated things that I couldn't put into words and gave it a form and presented it in a way that I could sort of see it and understand it, and which allowed me to either understand part of myself or part of the world in a in a different way. And that's how I became interested in writing poems, and that's why and that's still like my favorite poems kind of do something like that. So and that's not necessarily all of poems, but I think the poems that I return to the most, or that I'm drawn to the most, have that aspect. And then as what keeps me coming back to writing poems, I mean, I just like making stuff, and this is the only thing I can make. You know, it's the I mean, I can't like if I wasn't a writer, I would probably be trying to make something else and doing it quite badly. I mean, like when I've tried to do like visual art, like my drawings are somewhere between like early cave art and like modern stick figures, and that's like at my best. So this feels like the one thing that I'm capable of. So but I just like making stuff. So.
And I really want to thank you and to thank you both for having us here together, because we don't often get to read together. Our aesthetics are different, but when people hear us, we actually really are in conversation.
Yeah.
But we also, Matt's a poet's poet, so he doesn't love just one type of poetry. He likes poetry across the board, any poetry, and so do I.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that being with Matthew also feeds my drive to write poetry, because I think it's one of the ways that we communicate.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're both poets to my mind. Like, I mean, there's constantly things to learn from just reading and rereading your work, and we are just incredibly grateful that I'm so happy that Matt was able to get you both out here, and I'm sure that
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
That's Matt Donovan.
Matt Donovan and Matt Olzmann. But thank you all for being here for this conversation. I'm sure there's more that you'll have to say to these two as they're signing books over here, or if you just stop by to see them. Matt, I don't know if there's other things that you, yeah, they're going to be over here signing books. And thank you both again for a wonderful reading and just a really beautiful conversation as well.
Thank you.